This one has the title 5% Human at the top and by J. Wilburn. So let's see what we can make of this. All right, Capper. Hold on, let me start differently. The last thing Capper said to her before going to check the traps by the river was, "I love you." It was as good as any final words could be, but even those did not seem to be enough. The snares were empty. A couple sly animals had nipped the bait without setting off the traps. Capper rebaited them and hoped for the best. He was kneeling at the first fish trap. Let's keep this simple. I don't want to explain how the trap works. He was kneeling at the nets, first nets in the river, but never saw if there were any fish in them. All right. Downstream, a young girl's voice cried out in shrill pain or fear. It could have been both. "Help me. Someone please help me." Oh gosh, my nose is itching, I'm sorry. Alright. Alright, Capper stood and took a few steps toward that cry of distress, like any person would. Say any person of goodwill would. Then he stopped. The exact same words repeated in the exact same tone. He cursed under his breath and ran the other way along the river. Let's see. Capper wanted to head back to the caves and warn the others, but he did not want to lead the monsters to his people. He had decided that he would stop on the other side of the next tree to catch his breath and find cover for a little while. Again, like many things he had planned that day, he never got to see his plans through. He felt the pressure plate give under his feet. All the strength gave out under his legs. All the strength gave out under his legs before any sort of nerve shock took him down. As he lay frozen isn't right, paralyzed and shaking upon the trap in the scattered leaves, the lure sounded again under him this time. Alright. We'll have the same words happen again. We'll copy. Help me, someone please help me. This time it was the quivering voice of a little boy. This close to the speakers, he could hear the electronic distortion behind the computer generated voice. Their footsteps were heavy as they approached. He wanted to close his eyes to block them out, but he had no control over his eyelids. His body was numb, but he thought he could feel that he had wet the inside of his buckskin pants. These creatures wore metal and plastic protection over their giant bodies and misshapen heads. From the dimensions and proportions, Capper believed these were the ones everyone called squid heads. Alright. A squid was a creature from the ocean. Capper hadn't visited the ocean for many years, since he was very young, before the world was invaded by monsters from the sky. Alright, that probably needs to be 2 paragraphs, but I'll hit that later. Alright. They loaded him into a cage and checked the other traps they had left along the river bank. Finding no one else as dumb as Capper to get caught like this, they took up their traps and loaded everything, including Capper, onto their ship. At least they removed... Oh, thank you for the follow. I appreciate it. At least they removed the other traps. So maybe the people he cared about would be safe for a little while longer. Capper knew he was in the air because he had seen their ships from below his entire life. It felt like a long journey, but he had no point of reference for such things. He knew he had ridden in cars and even an airplane, once when he was very young, but his memory on those things was very vague. It was almost the memory of other people telling him about it. They hauled his cage. They hauled his cage on a levitating platform through impossibly white hallways. other creatures of all shapes, sizes, and colors passed on both sides as Capper floated through the halls, through the passages. His buckskins had dried, but he smelled of his own urine from when they trapped him. The rest of the building he passed through almost had no smell at all. The air was cool, like late fall or early winter. Occasionally, he passed, I'll say they. All right, occasionally they passed glass windows that overlooked vast cities. Overlooked a vast city. Why would it be cities? A vast city of light, metal, and motion. We got a bot join us. Isn't that nice? Do I want to become famous? No, thank you. I appreciate you asking, though. Let me go ahead and block you. Alright. We'll say goodbye to the bot, everybody. Alright, nice of them to stop by. So we blocked a bot today, and now only 1 billion more to go. Alright, occasionally they passed glass windows that overlooked a vast city of light, metal, and motion. Capper. I'll keep this the same paragraph. Capper was not without imagination. He had things described to him before. He had images in his head from books and movies early in his life. This was still a difficult scene to process after so many years living in woods and caves in hiding. All right. The impression he did process well was of being very high up, like on a cliff, but much higher than anyone he had seen out in the wild. These were structures built by the monsters from space they had truly claimed his world as their own. Anyone who could build this would have no trouble rounding up and finishing off the rest of the people in his group and any others that still lived on Earth. His cage entered a closed white box. Capper felt sure, say certain this would be the last time he ever saw the outside world. The cage opened and he cowered to the back. Alien voices garbled back and forth to one another. Alright, alien voices garbled back and forth to one another. A computerized voice, not disguised even as well as the lures that trapped him, said, "Step out of the cage. Step out of the holder. You won't be harmed." When he did not comply, the message repeated exactly like before. Then mechanical arms reached in for him. Capper burst out in a rush and crossed the room in a full run. The walls were curved, and the corners not well defined, with everything one bright color. He misjudged the distance and smacked his head on the wall. As he tumbled to the smooth, cool floor, the cage and a squid head and a tall green monster Capper had never seen before backed out of the room. They kept their large, dark eyes on him. They kept their large, dark eyes on him. And he got the impression that they were somewhat afraid he might attack. But he had no intention of going near them. The door sealed, and he was in a stark white chamber all alone. A computerized voice said, "You are safe. You will not be harmed. You will be fed and cared for." Capper curled into a ball where he had fallen and cried himself to sleep. He had no clear feel for how much time had passed. The light that seemed to come from every surface brightened and dimmed through a repeated cycle. For a while, he tried to count to see if it matched day and night outside. But he quickly discovered that such a thing was not possible. Without the sun, time was whatever his captors decided it was. Food was delivered through slots in the walls that folded down to create raised, flat surfaces. Water was available any time he said the word water. They had trained him to do that. it popped out of the wall in a spout arcing into a shallow pool. When he pulled back from drinking, the fountain folded back into the wall. Alright, I want to separate these and talk about the food more. Alright. They served him what he assumed was meat, but he could never identify what type. It was always dull and flavorless. The vegetables. Oh, Clever, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you being here. Appreciate you resubbing, man. It's good to see you again. Of course, I see you on other social media all the time, but it's nice to have you here. All right. Let me fix a word here. Flavorless. How's it going, man? All right. The vegetables. Yeah, it has been a little while. You all get busy. The vegetables were different varieties. Okay, let me fix that. The vegetables were different varieties. Some sparked a memory from his days before the invasion, but he could not recall their names, and he never asked his captors any questions. Okay, hold on. Over time, the shape of his room changed. Surfaces to sit and lay upon formed. He found those softer than even the pallets they made for themselves in the caves. He almost always wondered about the fate of his friends. Yeah, let's just keep it friends. Of his friends, and especially her. For all he knew, they were in rooms just like this all around him. That thought made him very sad. All right. He had lost count of light and dark cycles when the door opened and she walked in. Capper cowered against a back wall and stared. She sat upon one of the surfaces closer to the door. He waited for her to do something, but she didn't say anything or make any moves after sitting down for the first several visits. Capper would watch the open door and wait for someone else to come, but no one ever did. Okay. I was going to write some other stuff earlier, but I think I'm just going to keep going right here. She looked more human in her features than the others. Her skin was a light bluish color that made her appear cold. Her skin was a light bluish color that made her appear cold or sick. When she stood, she was a bit taller than an average human. Her clothing shimmered like the city he had glimpsed on his way in here. He would startle each time she stood, but then she left without a word, and the door sealed again. One day, he decided he was going to try to flee the room the next time the door opened. She entered like before, but this time the door closed behind her. Now, okay, let's put one more thing on here. I need to put this up here. Her blue head was completely bald. Alright. She entered like before, but this time the door closed behind her. She sat down like always, but Capper stood and moved along the wall opposite her. He finally spoke. "What do you want?" to help the humans. She answered in a perfectly uncomputerized voice. What are you? I'm a worker here, and part of the effort to help the human species to survive. Capper shook his head. I've been held here for I don't know how long. 23 days, she said. Counting the day you arrived. Alright, there's some other stuff I'll need to add earlier to make this story work the way it needs to, but I think I'm just going to push through to the end here and then fix that later. He took several deep breaths. Finally, he sat down on the soft surface he used for a bed. All right, he took several deep breaths. Finally, he sat down on the soft surface he used as a bed. That seemed too short of a time. But he had no idea if she was lying or not. He wasn't sure what they gained by lying about that. Why did you bring me here? She said, the human species is dying out. We are making an effort to bring you back. Why don't you just take me back to... He stopped short, thinking about his friends. He worried he might give away their hiding place. Maybe that was what this was all about. We know about your den. We've not taken any others since we brought you, she said. You know where we live. Of course. she said. There are 40 of you in all. 29, let's spell this out. 29 female, 3 pregnant. He just stared and then growled out, "Leave them alone." We're not trying to hurt you. We are trying to repopulate the planet with your species. Then leave us alone. She stood, and he backed across his bed. The door opened, and she said, "I'll be back soon, and we can talk more." The conversations continued. He started asking about the invasion of Earth. She gave some details, much of it, even though she spoke everything in his language, was beyond his understanding. Maybe if he had gone further in school before everything ended, he would get more of what she was saying. The part he did understand was that mistakes were made. People, let's say, monsters who oversaw the invasion were removed from power, and efforts were made to save the remaining humans alive. All right. Efforts were made to save the remaining humans alive. Okay. It all sounded like excuses to him. More than once, she asked if he would like new clothing. He declined every time, even though what he was wearing was starting to smell. One visit, she said, all right, I think early on I made it that it was the last thing he said. I may have to change some of those if I decide to go a different direction here. Okay. One visit she said, I am able to crossbreed with humans. What? He really did not understand what she meant. My species is compatible with yours. All right. What does that mean? It means I can be impregnated. It means I can be impregnated by a human, by a fertile human. Human male. The resulting child, I'll say offspring, the resulting offspring would be stronger and more resilient than a pure bred human. Capper shook his head. I don't... Is that why I'm here? It is. It can be accomplished. It can be accomplished by taking a sample via mechanical means, or we can engage in intercourse and procreate that way as well. It's up to you. I want to go back to my people, he said. We won't do anything until you are comfortable. But it is important that we continue this effort to save your species. You could leave the planet and let us have it back. Alright. She said, I'll leave you and return at another time after you've had time to... Alright, let's put in an M dash there. I don't need time. He stood up. door opened. Yeah. 3 buttons to get an M dash. Alright. The door. Yeah, it's fine. The door opened. And she stepped out. It was several cycles before she returned. When she did, she tried to talk to him about other things. But he said, I want to go back to my people. I want you to leave us alone. Your den and the others around the world are maintained in protected areas. These preserves are off limits because I, like many of the fellow Americans, am a compulsive consumer. Bought a latest edition of Brewer's Phrase and Fable. Have no idea how I'm going to use it. I don't know, man. Sometimes we figure out what we're going to do with things before or after we get them. Your den and the others around the world are maintained in protected areas. These preserves are off limits to development. Your species is procreating naturally, but not at a rate that will stave off eventual extinction. He just stared at her. Finally, he stood up and the door opened. What are you afraid I'm going to do? He asked. I don't understand what you mean. Every time I move, alright, let me there we go. Every time I move, the door opens and you leave. I'm powerless here. What are you worried I might do? We just don't want to agitate you. He shook his head. Not holding me captive would be a good start. She stood up. We find with a little sleep and food, you tend to calm down. You're trying to have sex with me, he said. How calm are you trying to get me? She waved. Okay, hold on. She waved a hand, and the door closed. She motioned at herself. Are you ready to have sex now? No. I don't want to have sex with you. Would you prefer to be introduced to other potential partners? No. What are you talking about? We need to crossbreed your species to create more resilient stock. We find that about 5% human DNA is ideal. Any more tends to punctuate the flaws in your genetic code. With enough generations, we believe that human DNA can be introduced to the general population successfully, preserving the legacy of your planet and species. I thought you were trying to save us, he said. She stared a moment and then sat back down. We are, but your genetic code has too many flaws to overcome naturally from the diminished populations your species has reached. You also show a lack of adaptability to the current conditions you face. We are going to preserve your genetic code through crossbreeding before the natural population is extinct. He had no idea what to say next. Am I ever going to be allowed to return to my people? She took a deep breath, which seemed a very human response to him, and said, "There probably won't be any of your people left after much longer. You should want to help with this effort to preserve a portion of your legacy." He turned away. Okay, hold on. I think I'm in the home stretch here, whatever the story is. He turned away. "I want you to leave now." He heard the door open again behind him. Okay. He had lost count of how many times she had asked the same question. "Would you like some clean clothes?" "No. Why? Do you not find me attractive in my current state?" Well, he wouldn't talk like that. "Do you not find me attractive like this? Are you asking if I would have sex with you right now? Because no, just leave." She stepped out, and the door closed again. He looked around the chamber, but found there was nothing really to look at. He knew she would be back. This was his life, and he wasn't sure what it all meant anymore.